Hello, Texas Granny here. A sad Texas Granny. A mad Texas Granny, but a still hopeful Texas Granny. Now, I know the election didn't go the way a lot of us wanted, but I've lived in Texas most of my life, the state that couldn't even get rid of Ted Cruz. So trust me when I say, this too shall pass. Maybe. But it's hard. We went from hope, joy, excitement, and pride to the deepest feeling of despair in a matter of a few hours. Now, I was a flight attendant for 30 years, so believe me when I say a drop in altitude like that is bound to create some injuries. Now, some of us have been hollering about this rise in Christian nationalism, Republican conservatism for a few decades, because we saw this train wreck coming. Suddenly, Jesus was everywhere in Texas, except for the places Jesus himself actually frequented. We were being controlled by rich money changers, and they were slinging their Bibles around like weapons. You see, here in Texas on Sunday mornings, you can find large crowds of good folks gathered together at church. Lots of bang for your buck, so encouraging a little partisan politics from the pulpits made sense to men seeking power and control. Where better than the churches? And in Texas, there are so many churches. One of the first questions Texans ask new people is, where do you go to church? So after a few decades of this, the biggest money changer of all figured he could use and control the good Christian faithful and scare them into voting for him using repetitive misinformation and deception. And now we're looking at a Republican-controlled country for the next few years. Y'all remember the last few times the Republicans have had complete control? Well, let me help. The rich got richer and the poor multiplied. Government agencies and institutions were starved of funding and the rich got their taxes cut. I just don't know what these working class folks struggling to survive think will happen to the price of groceries if we deport all farm workers. Now, I do imagine that some of the incarcerated people in Trump's massive deportation camps could be turned into slave labor, just like Trump promised he'll do. You see, when someone is a chronic liar, it's difficult to know which of his many threats you need to worry about and which ones are just more pieces of GOP gaslighting. Can we believe him? I believe we can believe that he believes we'll believe it either way. Are there any folks left in today's Republican Party who will stop harmful legislation put forth by fools? Stop the MAGA crowd from running over this country like a damn stampede? Could you name a few? Trust me when I tell you, Trump will make sure a lot of our government institutions lose their funding or are closed altogether. The exact list changes from time to time depending on who the baby man is mad at, but trust me, they will privatize whatever they can once they figure out how one of their rich buddies can make a buck off everyday people's lack and misery. And those churches I mentioned, well, they often are some of the largest businesses in a small town and pay little, if no, taxes. Their influence is great and many offer much needed services, but usually the help comes with a price, or at least a little dogma to feed your sinful soul. The busy, hard-working folks going to the grocery stores complaining about the price of eggs and gas feed the wealthy when they buy their latest must-haves, whether it's a phone, a brand, or a new gadget. These salt-of-the-earth people often pay a higher tax rate than the wealthy and the well-connected, whose lifestyles they're funding. Through subliminal and systematic racism and patriarchy, these good folks are taught to belittle climate action, demean LGBTQ, fear others, and save the babies. The younger MAGA voters tend to be self-spoiled and a little more concerned with themselves than living in a community of caring, educated people where everyone contributes fairly and everyone thrives. Once the IRS is defunded and goes back to being buried in tax cheat cases, those corporations and individuals who do still pay taxes won't have to worry anymore about it. But that's what Americans voted for, even though the Biden-Harris IRS has recouped millions of dollars in unpaid taxes from large corporations and the wealthy in their 4 years in office. But that upsets the wealthy because the rich don't want to pay taxes. Not just more taxes, but taxes at all, like Trump himself has bragged about doing. So cheating's okay now. Y'all just have at it. Maybe your case file will be read in another 10 years. Maybe. So you see why I'm sad and mad and very disappointed. I believed in the people of this country to say no to a convicted felon, a rapist, a serial adulterer, and an insurrectionist. A vile man who took state secrets home with him, has called for the dismantling of the Constitution, and disrespects our military. A man seeking vengeance and retribution because he was held accountable for some of his myriad of crimes over a lifetime. A man whose anger and rage has been escalating in his last few years. A man who despises so many groups of our neighbors and friends. I believed in the good people of this nation to figure out how to get some real information and not fall for all the misinformation, both foreign and homegrown, being fed to them on a daily basis. But instead, they were taught that legitimate news and true journalistic outlets were fake news and an enemy of the people. I'm afraid we'll soon be left with only GOP-run propaganda channels. And if NPR survives, it will be a MAGA-run, for-profit private entity. So I don't imagine it's going to get better before it gets a whole lot worse. I'm disappointed in the American voters who said they were okay if Putin did whatever he wants, and are okay with giving Ukraine and probably Poland back to Russia, dismantling NATO, and leaving our allies around the world to fend for themselves. Because that's another one of Trump's oft-repeated promises. I'm sad because the Trump Supreme Court has given presidents free rein to do whatever they want with no recourse. Apparently, a lot of American voters are okay with that. By voting for him, Americans empowered people who don't think they should have to tell the government if they have any weapons or which ones they are. Trump says he's going to release all those who participated in the last attempt to overthrow our government, and that he should have never left office even though he lost in 2020. This is not going to end well, and we should all be sad. People are desperate. They're hurting. I get that. But I have never heard one Republican tell me exactly how they plan on helping, especially in our hometowns and communities. I was surprised to hear some aides from one of our elected officials' offices say that the only thing we need for our statewide public school mental health challenges is love and Jesus. Texas is also where we don't ask for much information when you buy a gun. So I'm thinking this will probably not go the way that most Trump voters wanted. So we don't ask for information if you want to buy a firearm, but we do need to know when your last menstrual cycle was and which bathroom you like to use. My LGBTQ friends are rightfully scared. Some folks just say, so what? You know, the Democrats did do some things that had never been done before. We've strengthened the network and ground game, registered lots of new voters, reached out to our communities, built coalitions, and frankly, we worked our butts off. But we've still got a long way to go. The other side has had a 40-plus year head start. Their dreams are coming true. We're going back to the 1950s and beyond, as far as women, people of color, LGBTQ, and such are concerned. 1950s. But people are carrying around backpacks full of 2024 fear, hate, and desperation with presidential permission to be ugly and vile towards one another. I'm afraid it's going to be a bumpy ride going forward. Fasten your seatbelt. So it's okay to feel all the things. Grief is a complicated emotion, and we all have to figure out the best way through it for each of us, while we still can. While some empathy and care are still legal, without a price tag. But there's a big old speed bump in the cosmic continuum, so who knows what's ahead for America. Ride or die, we're all in this together. And no matter what the early MAGAs tried to tell us, it does take a village. Hang tough. Cowgirl up. Love you, Texas Granny.